Oke.
Baik, selamat pagi menjelang siang untuk teman-teman mahasiswa semuanya, Bapak Ibu dosen yang terhormat. Pembicara kita juga di pagi hari ini ada Kang Isa SHLLM yang saat ini sedang berada di Yemen, early in the morning ya, berarti sekitar jam 7-an di sana. Baik, pertama-tama izinkan saya mewakili Departemen Hukum Internasional, juga Indonesian Center for International Law, Fakultas Hukum Unpad, mengucapkan terima kasih atas kehadiran Bapak, Ibu, dan teman-teman mahasiswa di ruang ini. Saya juga hendak menyapa pertama-tama para mahasiswa S1 yang sedang mengambil mata kuliah International Humanitarian Law, kemudian yang sedang mengambil Refugee Law di S2, juga teman-teman mahasiswa yang berasal dari berbagai universitas di Indonesia. Saya juga hendak menyapa Bapak dan Ibu dosen, enggak Bapak ya, Ibu saja, Ibu-Ibu dosen yang sudah hadir di siang hari ini, ada Ibu Kristi dan Ibu Orin, dan juga mungkin ada Bapak Ibu dari berbagai universitas Indonesia yang sudah bergabung di pagi hari ini. Alhamdulillah di ruangan Zoom ini telah hadir Kang Isa Soemawidjaja, SHLM, yang seperti biasa tidak pernah absen, hampir setiap tahun meluangkan waktunya untuk sharing ilmu dan pengalamannya setelah sekian lama beliau berkiprah di UNHCR. Terima kasih sekali Kang Isa ya sudah meluangkan waktu dan perkenannya untuk kembali ke alma mater Fakultas Hukum tercinta untuk memberikan ilmu sekaligus motivasi pada para mahasiswa tentunya yang mungkin di masa yang akan datang akan memilih path-nya sebagai humanitarian worker mungkin. Sedikit perkenalan pembicara dari guest lecture di pagi hari ini. In brief, Kang Isa ini merupakan alumni dari Fakultas Hukum Unpad dari kampus kita angkatan 2001, kalau tidak salah barengan dengan Pak Imam Mulyana ya. Kemudian juga mendapatkan gelar LLM S2-nya dari University of Essex tahun 2009 barengan sama Ibu Orin. Jadi ini kayaknya nyambung semua bareng dengan ini dan itu. Dan beliau juga sudah bekerja melalang buana di office-nya UNHCR di berbagai negara. Nanti beliau akan menjelaskan sendiri di mana saja beliau pernah ditugaskan, dan saat ini Kang Isa menempati posisi sebagai Head of Durable Solution Unit di UNHCR, Sub-Office Aden di Yemen. Nah, pada kesempatan di pagi hari ini, Kang Isa akan memberikan materi mengenai perlindungan pengungsi di dalam konflik bersenjata yang merupakan bagian dari rangkaian perkuliahan hukum humaniter internasional. Jadi sebagaimana kita ketahui bersama, banyak sekali yang ditimbulkan dari terjadinya suatu konflik bersenjata, dari mulai korban jiwa, kerusakan lingkungan, ketidakstabilan ekonomi, dan juga migrasi. Jadi orang-orang yang merasa kehidupannya terancam, mereka akan memilih untuk meninggalkan wilayah konflik, mencari tempat yang lebih aman, dan ini bukan tanpa permasalahan. Jadi ketika orang-orang ini menjadi pengungsi dan menjadi asylum seeker, mereka ini berpotensi untuk terlanggar hak-haknya, maupun juga tidak dapat mendapatkan perlindungan dari negara asalnya atau juga perlindungan internasional. Nah, kebetulan saat ini Kang Isa ini sedang bertugas di Yemen, salah satu negara di Semenanjung Arab yang mendapatkan akibat sebenarnya dari konflik yang terjadi di negaranya, ataupun menerima pengungsi dari Somalia, dari Ethiopia, yang sebenarnya notabene kalau lihat dari map itu across the ocean ya, tapi paling dekat sebenarnya di Teluk Aden tersebut. Dan berdasarkan data UNHCR yang saya lihat di websitenya UNHCR Yemen, sebenarnya ada sekitar 95.000 pengungsi ya, kebanyakan dari negara-negara ya dari Horn of Africa lah intinya. Jadi mau tidak mau Yemen ini sebenarnya mendapatkan pengaruh yang cukup signifikan dari akibat konflik yang terjadi di negaranya ataupun yang berasal dari negara-negara di Afrika. Jadi pada kesempatan hari ini akan menjadi kesempatan yang sangat berharga buat kita semua, akan mendengarkan langsung sharing pengalaman ataupun ilmu yang dipunyai oleh Kang Isa dan juga kita bisa mendengarkan langsung sebenarnya keadaan realnya yang di Yemen itu seperti apa, dan bagaimana konflik yang terjadi ini memang berakibat pada masalah pengungsian, dan solusi apa sebenarnya yang sudah dilakukan oleh UNHCR dalam merespon permasalahan yang terjadi. Baik, tanpa berlama-lama lagi, mungkin saya akan langsung mempersilahkan Kang Isa untuk memulai presentasinya. Dipersilakan Kang Isa, mau dalam bahasa Indonesia, mau dalam bahasa Inggris, feel free. Silakan Kang Isa.
Terima kasih Teh Ira, terima kasih teman-teman, selamat pagi semuanya. So very good morning to everyone. So thanks once again to spare some of your time just to listen what I'm going to share based on my experience working here in Yemen. I've been working here only since February 1st, so not that long. But Yemen is actually my first country back in 2010 when I was only UN volunteer. So that was my first international exposure to other country working for the refugees. And I was so lucky because I came to Yemen before the war. So I really experienced the Yemeni hospitality, the beauty of the country, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, at the same time, I got evacuated twice because, you know, the war just started at that time. Or, as you all know, the Arab Spring came to Yemen in around 2010. So now this is my second time in Yemen, but it's in the south. There's a city called Aden. I'm going to talk a little bit more also about Aden and also the situation in Yemen. But maybe Tahira, I would like to request your approval to share my screen because I have my presentation ready to be shared with others. Thank you. Okay, can you tell me if you now see my screen?
Yes, Kang Isa. Perhaps you can.
Okay,
great. Okay, yeah, slideshow, progress.
Okay, so this is the first slide. I hope that you all can see. So I'm just putting the title as advocating for refugee rights in southern Yemen because again, Yemen is currently under war. We have two different governments in the north and in the south. So all the information that I'm going to share you mostly on what is happening in the south because south and north is completely different protection regime when it comes to refugees. So yeah, but of course I also have some information about the north if if you're also keen to know a little bit more about refugee protection in the north. But I can really say that I'm talking about the whole Yemen because again, it's a one country with two different governments. Now, maybe just to start my presentation by again sharing some statistics, the current one, at least by mid-2022. I think people who are following refugee issues, IDP issue, I think you are all aware that we currently have more than 100 million people who have been displaced worldwide. And most of them, more than 53 millions, are IDPs or internally displaced people. And as you may know, that IDPs, they move from one place to another place, but still within under the same country where they are originally from. Around 32 million plus 4.9 million, they are refugees and asylum seekers. But among these 32 million of refugees, 5.8 million of them, they are Palestinian refugees. And as you know, that we have a different UN agency, UNRWA, UNRWA, that has a specific mandate dealing with Palestinian refugees in certain locations in Middle East countries. But then, of course, when the Palestinian nationals are seeking asylum outside those countries or in a country where UNRWA is not functioning or operating, so they are also able to seek asylum. They can seek asylum also in UNHCR, and UNHCR will process their asylum application. We also have around 5.3 million that we consider them as other people in need of international protection. And who are these people? So these mostly refer to the Venezuelans who have been displaced from Venezuela to different countries, they may be in need of international protection, but we don't really put them under the category of asylum seeker as well as refugees, because the Venezuelans in this category, they keep moving from one country to another country. And I think probably the final destination, the intended final destination, is the US. So this basically the snapshot of displaced people. Unfortunately, that we have reached now beyond 100 million. And unfortunately, with all the emergencies happening now in Europe, with the Ukraine, now Sudan, probably the number is going to increase.
Kang Isa, sorry, are we
Yes.
still on the first slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay, now, again, just to remind everyone again, I'm sure that many people already aware about this, but the millions of refugees around the world, 72%, they are from 5 countries, yeah? They're from Syria, Venezuela, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and South Sudan. And most of these refugees are hosted also by 5 countries: Turkey, Colombia, Germany, Pakistan, and Uganda, that has refugee population or being generously hosting these refugees more than 1 million. And even in Turkey, there are more than 3 million refugees from Syria, mostly are currently seeking asylum in Syria. So even if you see the list of the top 10 countries of where the refugees are currently being hosted, most of them are being hosted in low and middle income countries. Yeah. Only few countries that are considered as developed countries or high income countries or advanced economy countries like Germany, they are basically representing the minority host country among the others country who are hosting the refugees. And again, if you see these countries, most of these countries actually are neighboring countries to countries who are producing the refugees. And Turkey, as you know, that they have land borders with Syria. Colombia has land borders with Venezuela. Pakistan has land borders with Afghanistan, and Uganda has land border with South Sudan. Only Germany that actually has no neighboring countries that are producing refugees. Yeah. Now, with the global statistics that I just shared with you, now I want to talk a little bit more about Yemen. But before talking about how the refugees are protected in a war-torn country like Yemen, maybe also just to give you some idea about what is actually going on in Yemen. Because as you have seen that in the media, not so much news about Yemen, I would say. And I think the global attention has been shifted to many different countries, including Afghanistan and now, of course, Ukraine. So I think this is a great opportunity as well to kind of like raise awareness again about what has been happening in Yemen. And please do not forget about Yemen. And hopefully this presentation also inspires you to write something about not only humanitarian law, refugee law, but also Yemen, because there are some issues that you can really relate to about what is going on also in Indonesia or in Southeast Asia in general, especially when it comes to the mixed movements, which I'm going also to talk a little bit more later in my slides. So as you can see, this is the Yemen zones of control. So there are so many different actors that now are fighting each other. And in addition to that, as you also may know, that basically it's proxy war as well. So there are many different actors, regional actors, not Yemenis, who are also kind of like contributing to the war that is going on now in Yemen. So basically, if you see on your screen, I'm currently in Aden. It's how do you say that? Dark brown color.
Sorry, Kang Isa, we're still looking at the first slide. Actually, yeah.
Okay, so on my computer, actually, it's already on the 4th slide.
Or can you just send me your?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Happy to share.
Is it on the 1st slide or is also on the 4th slide now?
It's already in the 3rd slide, I think. The map.
The map, yeah. Okay,
Can you
so
into slideshow because it's quite small here?
how do I do that? Wait.
Or perhaps that's okay. I think it's, we can see at least it's
Is
moving.
it's moving? Okay, it's moving now, yeah. Sorry, I don't know how to make it bigger now. Is it okay if I continue with this or?
Yes, proceed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I hope that you can see the map now. So I'm currently in the south. As you can see from the map, is the dark brown color. And in this area, it is under the STC, Southern Transition Coalition forces, that is backed by the UAE. And this is the confusing part, is that because the South, or Aden, is actually the base of the internationally recognized government of Yemen. The president is currently working on exile in Saudi Arabia. And I was also a bit surprised when I came to Aden. When I arrived in Aden, I saw a different flag because the internationally recognized governments supposed to representing the unified Yemen. But the flag that they are using in Aden now, or in the south in general, is not the flag of Yemen. Because I understand from many colleagues here, national colleagues, the aspiration from many people in the south that they want to separate into a different or separate Republic of South Yemen. And then, as you can see again on the map, you see the dark green color, or the northern part of the Yemen, is actually under the Houthis' control. The Houthi is the rebel, the insurgent, and now they are de facto authorities in the north. Yeah, it's much bigger kind of probably area. And as a de facto authority, they have their own rule, government. And even me as a UN staff member, on my UN passport, I only have the official visa, assignment visa for the south. So I cannot go to the north because I need to get another visa. So can you imagine, it's one country with two different governments, two different authorities who issue different visas as well. So that's the situation of Yemen. And then north and south, and we also have some areas that are under different forces as well. We have the forces kind of like belong to the south, but they still anti-STC forces, if that makes sense, because they're still very loyal to the previous president who was assassinated years ago. And then in addition to that, we have like the tribal forces, also in the south, Hadrami elite forces, and I understand that they are backed by regional actors against another regional actor in the south. So probably this is the first time I'm in a situation where I kind of like understand a little bit more about what proxy wars are, because it is what it is now in Yemen. It's not only Yemeni against Yemenis, but there are so many different interest actors who are also contributing to the war in Yemen. And as you know, the North, Houthi, they are backed by Iran, and many arms supplies coming from Iran as well, for the North, for the northern forces. So if you are confused, don't worry, I'm also confused. And even if I ask the colleagues like Yemeni nationals, they also a bit confused about what is actually going on, who is actually doing what when it comes to war in Yemen. What it is very clear is that the war has been negatively affecting Yemenis, ordinary Yemenis. And you have no idea about the level of poverty, extreme poverty that I've seen since I arrived here. I mean, I've seen poverty in Indonesia, in other countries, but I've never seen anything like this in Yemen, and it's really sad reality. Now, I mentioned a little bit about the flags. So as you can see on the left side is basically what you know as Yemen flag, right? And I expected to see this flag when I arrived in the south because this is where the the international recognized government is based. But no, what I see is that the flag on your right side is the flag that is actually now everywhere in the south and in Aden in particular. Because again, the aspiration is for them to have a separate uh, republic one day, which is again against the will of the international recognized government, who is also based in the south. So again, this is very much confusing. But even when you landed in the Aden International Airport, the South Yemen flag that you will see is not the unified Yemen flag. It's something small, but this is something very noticeable and really raised some questions. What is going on? Okay, now hopefully you know a little bit about what is going on in Yemen. Now I want to talk a little bit more about refugee protection in Yemen. How the refugee who usually fled the war, persecution, generalized violence, come to country that is also not really safe, but because they have no choice, that they have to keep moving, and many ended up living in Yemen. And of course, UNHCR as a UN refugee agency and many different actors, we work closely with the government to provide the protection that the refugees need and access to their basic rights where they are in Yemen, while we're trying to assist them to find the durable solutions for their situation. So just a refresher, I'm sure that many of you already know about the refugee definition, but just in case those who do not know or just need some refresh, so here are basically the elements based on the Article 182 of the Refugee Convention. Any individual who meets these elements will be recognized or granted as a refugee. So the first one, of course, then they have to be outside of their country of origin. Yeah, because if they're still inside of their country of origin, usually they are called as internally displaced people, as you all know. And the individual has to have a well-founded fear of persecution, and the persecution itself has to be nexus to 5 convention grounds. You all know race, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group, and political opinion. The nationality here, please do not confuse this with citizenship, because it's not. It's mostly kind of like a membership to minority, ethnicity, or linguistic group. So usually nationality here is overlapped with race. And of course, the example of these grounds when it comes to Rohingya refugee situation, for instance, yeah, because they are being persecuted based on their race and also their religion. But the religion here, of course, you all know as well, is not only because you belong to a religious minority, which unfortunately in different countries you will be persecuted, targeted, and discriminated, but also it includes people who do not have religion, or people who convert to other religion, you know. And we have seen in some countries that have national legislation that actually gives death penalty for people who don't have religion, or those who actually convert from one religion to another religion. The membership of particular social group, this is something that you have to have the characteristic that is not changeable. So it could be your gender, it could be your gender identity, it could be your sexual orientation, and again, based on this, many people also being persecuted, that compels them to basically to leave to another country to seek international protection. And political opinion, I think, is very much clear to everyone. Many political opposition groups or people who have different view with their government or perceived to actually against the government are being persecuted, so they need to leave to another country for international protection. And the last element, of course, then you have to unable or unwilling owning to such fear to avail yourself of the protection of their country. Yeah, it sounds pretty simple, but the refugee status determination that we do get in UNHCR, it actually requires lots of time and requires a lot of resources as well. Even for one case to be finalized, for the decision to be finalized, whether you are a refugee or not, you know. But this is something that is very interesting. So for those of you also who are aspired to be one day, working with UNHCR or other UN agencies working for the refugees, I think this is something that you can actually try to make yourself familiar more, because it's very academically challenging, I would say. It's kind of like an academic work of protection that we do, because it's all about legal analysis, interviewing the asylum seekers, and making the assessment whether you are a refugee or not based on refugee convention as well as other relevant human rights conventions. Now, you know a little bit about the situation in Yemen, and unfortunately, well, because this is the international humanitarian law course or module, and I think you all very much know that in international humanitarian law or Geneva Conventions, you have to know about which one is the legitimate target and which one is not the legitimate target. And of course, civilians, refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, they are not the legitimate target. But unfortunately, the ongoing war in Yemen, sometimes the refugees, the migrants, the IDPs, they were the target. And this is one of the examples that I wanted to show you that happened in Yemen, where the refugee camp was attacked, airstrike by one of the warring parties. It's very concerning, and of course, it's a war crime. But again, there is, I don't know, I don't see any much international political pressure to investigate the crime, and I think many people already forget about it as well, But it's not the only incidents that happen against civilians, refugees, or migrants in Yemen, whether in the north or in the south. And even because of the war, even the detainees who were in prison, the detention center was also being targeted. And this happened in 2022, as you can see. And in this incident, more than 100 detainees were killed. Again, this is something that in 2022, you will see like so many medias covering about this. But again, now 2023, I don't think even people remember about this. Again, you will see a bit different situation if this happened in other continents, for instance. So again, I think you and the law students, law academia, I hope that you all can help to raise awareness about what is going on in Yemen, and basically just to aim for those responsible to be accountable at some point. Okay, now back again to the situation of refugees in Yemen or globally. What I wanted to show you here in this slide and the next slides, what do you see? When you see this kind of picture, do you think about refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, or something else? Because I think many people, they have like their own idea about what refugee looks like, about what a migrant looks like, about what an asylum seeker looks like physically, But I hope this slide and the next slide will change your mind a little bit as well. Of course, when you see this picture, you wouldn't think that this is a refugee. How can a refugee, they are wearing nice clothes, having like fancy cars and staying in a very fancy hotel, right? And then you see this again, maybe they are migrants, they are refugees, they are asylum seekers. But the idea of showing all these slides, okay, the next slide is there's no way that this is probably a refugee because he's using a mobile phone or, he's taking airline to move from one place to another place. But all these pictures, hopefully, to challenge your mindset about what the refugee, migrant, or asylum seekers should look like, because everyone can be refugees, regardless your economic status, your wealth status, your nationality, where you're from. Everyone can be a refugee, including how you fled the country, whether by boat, by land, or by airline. Again, everyone can be refugee, because again, this is the my personal experience when I worked in Indonesia, when some of the refugees were perceived to be a bit well off, and then the authorities would think that, oh, they must not be refugees because they have this and they have that, and they have those, you know. But just think about now you are in Bandung and suddenly there's a war going on, there's a bomb drops in Bandung, everyone will be affected. The poor, the wealthy people, everyone, you know. So at the end, you all have to leave, you know. So when you are in different countries, then of course you are representing different groups as well, age, gender groups, as well as your economic status as well. So I hope that these pictures also give you a little bit more idea about refugees, and there is no one picture that representing that is the real refugee, there is the real asylum seeker, there is the real migrant, because everyone, regardless how you look, can be refugee, migrant, or asylum seekers. Why it is very important to actually show this and to change your mindset about the stereotype against the refugees, because of course we have refugees, we have migrants, and there are two different categories of people. It's a different legal status, and when we actually know which one is the difference, then we will know which legal framework applicable to which one, you know, because it's again that different protection regime for the refugees, for the migrants. We have different convention, covenants, and so on and so forth, protecting them as a refugee, as a migrant, and also as a human being. Because at the end, refugee rights, migrant rights are human rights. And knowing the difference would definitely also make it uh, uh, kind of like very positive. Not what I'm trying to say is that if you know the difference between these two and how you use it, especially when you put this on your paper, on your media, I think it really helps for people like me, humanitarian worker working on the ground, uh, uh, to talk to the authorities, to use what you wrote, to use it as an effective advocacy tool, you know, because sometimes when you see in the media, everyone is just put under the same category, which is migrant, which sometimes that perceived as these people left the country only because of economic reason, which is not entirely true. Yeah. Okay. I don't know, Teira, if anyone wants to ask questions, they can. But if there is no, I will just keep moving. And then at the end, there will be also questions and answer session. Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about Yemen in particular, about the refugees living in Yemen. So this is the statistic that we have as per January 2023. There is slightly less than 71,000 individuals. Most of them are refugees, and small number they are asylum seekers. And in the south, we have only 40 plus thousand individuals, 36,000 they are refugees, and 4,300 they are asylum seekers. Most of them are male, 45% they are female. And where they're from, most of them are coming from Somalia, different parts of Somalia. We also have some Ethiopians, Syrians, Eritreans, Iraqis, Palestinians, those from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudanese, Jordanian, Egypt, Ivory Coast, and other nationalities as well. But except these two, Somalia and Ethiopia, other nationalities, they're really representing very small number of individuals. Yemen is a state party to the 1951 Convention and 1966 Protocol, so they have their own registration system only for the Somali refugees. So the Somalis, they are granted prima facie refugee status. I don't know if any of you or most of you probably know what is prima facie refugee status. So meaning is the group recognition, refugee recognition, usually granted by the government, and there is a presumption of eligibility if you can prove yourself as Somali, individuals from Somali, then the Yemeni government will then grant you a prima facie refugee status. The government registers the Somalis, while UNHCR, we register the non-Somalis. That include the Ethiopians and other nationalities. And for the Ethiopian, I'll take to talk a little bit more. As you all know, that there was a war going on in Tigray region, where many Tigrayan ethnicity, then they were kind of like uh, compelled to leave the country, and many of these Tigrayans they came to Yemen because again, the era I was mentioning in the beginning is very close actually. It's just across the ocean. Um, but the war, I understand, uh, has ended. So many of the Tigrayan Ethiopian refugees, they also have been returning to Ethiopia, and UNHCR and IOM work closely to facilitate those return as well. And I will talk a little bit more about this as well. And among the refugees in the south, we identified that many actually have specific needs. We have many women at risk, like women without uh, male support, single women, single parent, women with small children, they arrive in Yemen. And we have persons with disability, we have elderly who also came to Yemen, we have child at risk, including those who are separated from their parents or those who actually came alone, like 13 years old child came alone to Yemen. We also have seen those cases, and we also have seen many individuals, men or women, who suffered from sexual gender-based violence. So UNHCR, of course, not working alone. We work with other UN agencies, the authorities, of course, and of different NGOs to basically provide different interventions, services, and assistances to all these individuals. Um, yeah. Now, in addition to the refugees, of course, Yemen has more IDPs because of the war. If the refugees in total only 70,000 plus, there are more than 4 to 5 million Yemenis who are actually IDPs. They move from one place to another place. They live in a different town, village, or even governorate. And even those who are not displaced, according to the UN, around 21.6 million Yemenis, they are in need of humanitarian assistance. I understand that probably you have read somewhere that yes, Yemen is one of the worst humanitarian disasters nowadays, and many UN agencies, NGOs who are working here, whether we are understaffed or we are underfunded as well. So that's another challenge that we are facing here in Yemen. Now let's talk a little bit about the legal framework in Yemen when it comes to refugee, when it comes to human rights, and of course when it comes to humanitarian law. Yemen is a state party to the 1949 Geneva Convention, as well as its additional protocol 1 and 2. That's a good thing. And Yemen is the only country in the Arabian Peninsula that has ratified the Refugee Convention and its protocol. And as I mentioned, the Somali refugees are granted prima facie refugee status by the government of Yemen. And in addition to that, Yemen has also ratified many important human rights treaties, ICCPR, ICACR, CPRD, and CEDAW. And as you know, like all these human rights conventions, because it's human rights, so it's also applicable to basically all individuals living in Yemen. That includes the migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and also stateless people as well. So please keep this in mind as well. So because this is very important information, and as a UN, this is a very effective advocacy tool that we have been using every time we talk to the government, to remind them about their state obligation under all these different conventions, because we want to support the government by reminding them that they also have the main responsibility to do their job based on these different conventions. Unfortunately, although that Yemen is a state party to the 1951 convention, but there is no national legislation when it comes to asylum, refugee protection. We do have national legislation when it comes to IDPs, but nothing about refugees. It's a different situation in Indonesia. Indonesia is not a state party to the Refugee Convention or its protocol, but we do have the presidential regulation, the Perpres, that is very useful, but we don't have that in Yemen. So this is like a big gap, and we try to continuously advocating for the government to to have the national legislation. So yes, the registration of the non-Somali is conducted by us, but there is also another special situation. Although the Syrians that we register them, but Syrians they are granted temporary protection status by the government of Yemen. So we don't really do RSD to Syrians because the government already provides them with the temporary protection status. So there are two nationalities that kind of like given special protection status. One is Somali and the other one is Syrian. So other than these two, then UNHCR is doing full-fledged job registration and also refugee status determination. And despite the ongoing war, the economic crisis and all that, the refugees still have access to basic rights when they are in Yemen. That include health, education. Refugees in Yemen, they have free access to education, free of charge access to education from elementary to secondary school level, which is very admirable, taking into consideration, the situation in Yemen. But still, education is very much important, and the government knows the importance of education. So that's why they provide free education for refugees until secondary level. However, for the tertiary education, university level, the refugees have to pay. And since they are non-Yemenis, so if they go to university, the international student fee will be applicable for them, which is not cheap for many refugees as well. And livelihood opportunities, the refugees have access. It's not illegal for the refugee to work in Yemen or asylum seekers, but of course, most of the opportunities available for the refugees are in the informal sector. So labor work, daily wage workers, construction workers. So this is a typical types of work that many refugees are doing. For the female, many of them, they work as domestic workers in Yemeni households. So yeah, I mean, of course, we're trying to advocate, for more opportunities, including formal opportunities, livelihood opportunities for the refugees, so they can also work in formal places, not only in informal sector as well. Now, durable solutions. So as Tegira mentioned, so I'm heading the durable solutions unit here in UNHCR sub-office Aden, with the focus mostly on voluntary repatriation. We have some limited number for the third country solutions, but most of the preferred and most of the durable solution available for the refugees are actually for them to go back to their countries, even if their country is still not safe. It's just the reality. I mean, you're not safe in Yemen, you're not really safe back home, but still many people prefer to go back home because despite the situation in home country, probably it's still much better to be in their country of origin than in Yemen. One thing that is certain, there's no local integration. So this is the position that has been taken and expressed by the government multiple times. So there is no local integration, there is no naturalization process for the refugees who can eventually become citizens of Yemen. And even those who are married to Yemeni nationals, it's still not an easy access for the spouses, whether husband or wife, to get or to acquire or to obtain Yemeni citizenship. Although there's a good news as well. After 2010, the nationality or the citizenship law of Yemen now, it doesn't discriminate between husband and wife, mother and father. Both of them can pass on their nationality to their children, because as you know, that some countries this provision only applies to mostly father or male. But Yemen, discrimination free when it comes to gender, for them to pass on their nationality. But again, when it comes to refugees, still not an easy access for them to get the Yemeni citizenship. So that leaves the refugees whether they go back home or if they are eligible for third country solutions, when there is settlement or complementary pathways, then they go to a third country. So let's talk about the voluntary repatriation. So for the Somali refugees, UNHCR, we have this program that we call ASR, Assisted Spontaneous Return. So basically, this is to facilitate the Somali refugees to return from Aden or Yemen to different parts of Somalia. And usually we are using boats for them to cross the ocean and to reach Somalia. Last year, 602 refugees they went home, facilitated by UNHCR. And this year, the target is around 1,500. So 1,500 individuals are expected to return. And now we already have more than 1,100 something who already expressed their intention to go home. And there is a political issues, whether in Yemen as well as Somalia, that has not been addressed. But once it is addressed, then we can resume the boat movements from Aden to Somalia. For the Ethiopian nationals, IOM has a program that is called VHR, Voluntary Humanitarian Return. They facilitate Ethiopian migrants, Ethiopian refugees, Ethiopian asylum seekers to return to Ethiopia. UNHCR provides support because those who are refugees or asylum seekers, we will be doing the counseling about their country of origin, just to make sure that they know the situation in their country of origin, their village, their city, so they will make an informed decision whether they want to go back or not. But all these programs, ASR and THR, the nature of these programs, it has to be voluntary. So no one is forcing them to go home. But if they do want to go home, then UNHCR and IOM for the Ethiopians, then we will facilitate them to return. Yeah. Now, third country solutions, especially those who are following refugee issues in Indonesia, probably, especially when you interact with the refugees and maybe other actors, the humanitarian actors in Indonesia, many would tell you that they prefer to be resettled to a third country, whether to the US, Australia, European countries, Canada, and so on and so forth. But the reality is that it's really not up to UNHCR or up to anyone, basically, or the refugee themselves, but it is really up to the countries who are willing to take these refugees from these different countries to their countries. And the number has always been very limited. As you probably have heard as well, usually it's less than 1% refugees globally are resettled every year, meaning that more than 99% refugees globally, they're not resettled. And in Yemen, due to the ongoing war, economic hardship and all that, you would think that probably we will be prioritized for the refugees to be resettled. But just last year, we are only given 30 spots, individuals or refugees to be resettled from Yemen to other countries. And this year, the number is increased to 100. But can you imagine 100 refugees and we have 70,000 plus refugees? Is very small number. So meaning that most refugees in Yemen, they will not be resettled and they will be continuously staying here in Yemen. So while they are staying here, so this is the job of the government and the UN agencies and different humanitarian actors to basically provide them with, access to their basic rights. Yeah. Now, this will be the second part of my presentation, actually. So I just wanted to ask if anyone has questions so far. If not, then I will keep moving. Okay.
Continue.
Let's moving on now. So I feel that this is very important issue to discuss as well. And this is also part of my portfolio And the reason also I put like different slides, many slides about mixed movement, probably you could also relate to some of the issues because it is happening in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia, especially when it comes to Rohingya refugees, how they move from one country to another country, and sometimes even the boats taking not only the refugees but other people as well, and it is considered as mixed movements as well. So what is happening in the Gulf of Aden and eastern of Africa, uh, you will see some similarities, but of course differences as well. So if you see now on the screen, so Yemen is actually, we have border with the economic powerhouse country like Saudi Arabia and also Oman, uh, and um, and there are so many different opportunities when it comes to livelihood, formally, informally, legally, or illegally in those countries, and this attracts so many people to go to these countries. And as Ira mentioned in the beginning, is that despite that Yemen is part of the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula, but it's actually very close to eastern of Africa. And many countries in this eastern part of Africa, whether they are also suffering from armed conflict, uh, uh, and some of them also suffer from economic hardship uh, and and human rights violation, generalized violence. That at the end it compels people to leave or to move. And how to move to other countries? Usually, they are using whether smugglers or traffickers for them to move from one country to another country. You see on your screen on the map, Somalia, especially Bosaso, is actually very close to southern part of Yemen. They can just cross the ocean to Al Mukalla, Hadramaut, those in Berbera, they can easily also cross to Aden. And people from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and maybe from Sudan as well, usually they're all traveling to Djibouti. And then from Djibouti, then they take a boat to go to which is under the Thais governorate. Um, and that's how the the, the traffickers network or smuggling network, they're working in this part of the world. And unfortunately, these movements are not, well, these movements basically are very dangerous. That's one. And it creates lots of protection issues, human rights violation issues, and so on and so forth. Many people suffer from abuses, sexual assaults, and so on and so forth while they are moving from one country to another country. And usually the perpetrators are whether the smugglers, the traffickers, who are trying to extort more money from them. Otherwise, then they are under detention or they are kept in one location and not knowing when they will be moving forward to another location or to their intended final destination. And once they arrive in Yemen, in southern Yemen, there will be another group of people, part of these traffickers or smuggling network, who will trying to assist them to go to the Saudi border or to the northern part of Yemen. And that's also another dangerous journey for them to take because many people died. Many people died by or killed by different actors, and there are many people also were shot to death when they tried to cross the border to Saudi Arabia, and many people also are detained before they even manage to cross the border. So this is very concerning and one of the most challenging issues that we are facing when it comes to mixed movements. Because even how we identify vulnerable cases amongst these people is not always easy. Because these people, despite that many will be qualified for refugee status, but many also they don't really want to seek asylum because they think that it's much better to moving forward to the north and to go to Saudi so that they can work and earn money and send the money to their home countries. But we do manage to identify some vulnerable cases, so appropriate interventions are made by UNHCR and different actors. And now with the ongoing war in Yemen, even the north versus the south, that also kind of like contributes again negatively to the whole situation of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. many people who failed to cross the border to Saudi Arabia, the Northern de facto authority, they basically force these people to go to the south. So let the southern government deal with that. So when this happened, then of course UNHCR, IOM, and different actors then will try to provide support. But again, when it comes to providing support assistance, it's not always been easy because again, they're limited in our resources, and the fact that also many of these people, they will then try again to cross the border to Saudi Arabia. So it's difficult for them just to stay in one place because, you know, the reason why they fled their country, in their mind that they just wanted to earn much better livelihood in Saudi Arabia. So yeah, this is the situation when it comes to mixed movements in Yemen context. So many actors involved when it comes to mixed movements here in Yemen. UNHCR and IOM, we are the co-chair of the mixed movements working group in the south of Yemen. So of course, we work closely with the government. Among the UN system, we have, in addition to UNHCR and IOM, we have ILO, because many of these people, they are actually migrants. So how ILO also has been doing advocacy to promote rights, you know, at work, including for migrants. We have OHCHR when it comes to human rights issues that have been happening against a different category of people, asylum seekers, refugees, migrants. We have UNDP from the development perspective. And of course, we have also UNDC because many of these people, they are actually victims of trafficking or smuggling as well. And the IOM, they have their own UN network on migration. They are actually the director of the UN network on migration. They're also using this network channel to work on this issue. And in addition to that, we have many NGOs, local, international NGOs, also providing support, working closely with these issues as well. So, and again, you know, when it comes to Indonesia, as you know, when the Rohingya refugees boat disembarked, you will see UNHCR, IOM, and different humanitarian development partners working together as well, providing support. It's a bit similar situation, although it's also not exactly the same situation. Now, it is always very important to actually know that the states, they have the primary responsibility when it comes to providing support, protecting any individuals within their jurisdiction, because they are the states, they have the infrastructure to help people regardless of their nationality. And for those who actually have ratified different human rights conventions, they also have the obligations under those conventions to provide support. So please keep this in mind, because again, sometimes that the expectation, you know, in many different countries is always put on the UN when it comes to refugees, migrants, or asylum seekers, which is probably not entirely correct, you know, because it is the states who actually have the primary responsibility. It is their own country, it is their own jurisdiction, and they know, you know, how to manage the country. They have the hospitals, they have the schools, for instance. If they really want to be exclusive and open up all these public institutions for people who are not belong to those countries. And also very important in managing the borders, we understand the government's, the country's sovereignty. The country has their own political, national security interests, but at the same time, everything has to be in balance. How they manage their borders, it should be in balance with their obligation when it comes to human rights. So it is not, of course, correct. They close the borders because they don't want refugees to come, you know. So there will be many different human rights issues that will happen if that happens in many different countries actually. So yeah, second one is that when it comes to mixed movements, there's so many different regimes under the international law that are applicable to protect these people who keep moving. And of course, we have refugee law, we have the human rights law, we have the migrant workers convention. So there will be some provisions that are very useful, that can be used as advocacy tool and basically to remind again the state obligation to protect these people, and to make whatever approach or strategy that they have to be in balance with these conventions. IHL and ICL, that's also very much applicable. I think you are our expert now in IHL. And again, you know, when it comes to IHL, many of these countries, including Yemen, for instance, that usually used as a transit country, and is still very much the war is going on, and how, of course, you know, to differentiate between the legitimate target and the non-legitimate target, as I mentioned earlier. So this again, very much effective advocacy tool that we use as well every time we talk to the armed forces, whether in the north or in the south. And the ICL, you know, I think it's very important, especially when you think that these people are mostly they are victims of trafficking or smuggling. But sometimes, you know, the authorities, you know, they treat them as criminals, you know, which is not the case. You know, they are the victims. So meaning that there should be protection-centered approach when it comes to dealing with these people. Victims approach center when it comes to dealing with people. It's not putting them in one detention, you know, because they want to confine them so they cannot move to another place. So this is the wrong approach. And again, usually we remind the authorities they are the victims of trafficking or smuggling or organized crime, transnational organized crime. And many of these people have specific needs that we need to provide different interventions, assistance, and so on and so forth. Those of you who have probably taken the law of the sea, you probably know better that, you know, there are provisions under the convention that, you know, usually, you know, the state has obligation, right, to rescue individuals when they are in distress at sea, regardless of their nationality or status or the circumstances in which they are from. So this is a very important provision, especially in Yemen context, because most, if not all, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, they come to Yemen usually by boat. So, and usually the boats they are using is similar with the Rohingya boats. Usually, it's not really functioning properly, and at times that is just broken in the middle of the sea. So when that happens, then of course, you know, the states need to rescue them and for them to have a safe disembarkation. So then the authorities, UN, and different humanitarian actors can provide the assistance that these individuals need. The international labor law, maybe some of you have much interest also in this issue. So this is very important because many of these people, at least in Yemen context, as I mentioned earlier, they wanted to go to Saudi Arabia, while basically they will be involved mostly or engaged in informal sector, and that is also put them at risk of many different exploitations. So then, of course, when this happens, the different provisions under the international labor law also should be applicable. Yeah. Now, probably, I'm not sure if I already showed this before, but yes, this is one of the incidents, one of the major ones actually, that happened against the refugees. And it was an airstrike against a boat where the Somali refugees were trying to reach the southern part of Yemen, but then the Apache helicopter attacked them. 42 people killed in this attack. You know, again, this happened, but I don't think it gets so much exposure. And again, I don't think there's also so much pressure when it comes to investigating this incident. But it happened, and probably is, I don't know, probably is there's a risk also this going to happen again. But yeah, this also shows that even being refugees, being migrants, asylum seekers, or basically being civilians who have nothing to do with the war, is basically not prevent you to to get attacked in war situation. Now, I think this is one of my last slides, and this is the challenges, the major challenges that we are facing as a humanitarian worker working for refugees here in the South. So the ongoing war in Yemen, of course, South versus North, it's still a major issue because again, it's one country, two different governments, two different policies. How they deal with the refugees, how they want to protect the refugees, are completely different approach between the South and the North. And at the end, it's the refugees, migrants, asylum seekers who suffer from these different approaches. We have very much limited opportunities in the context of durable solutions. As I mentioned, third country solutions, resettlement, complementary pathways are super limited when it comes to number. The resettlement needs of refugees in Yemen is not in comparison with the quota that is given by different countries for the refugees in Yemen. And of course, when it comes to durable solutions, we also think about livelihood opportunities, education opportunities, access to healthcare and all that, this because of the situation in Yemen is even not only refugees, but the local people also have very much limited access to all this, and at the end, it really decreases the living quality, you as a person, as a human being in Yemen. And the third major issue or challenge is that the situation, whether in Somalia, in certain parts of Ethiopia, in Eritrea, it's very much unpredictable and continues to be insecure. So even if you want to go back home, but that home is also not safe to you. So many people then at the end, they just want to stay in Yemen, although the situation in Yemen also not so much better as well, So all these three major challenges, I think it will continue to be like this in the years to come. But those also who follow the political development here in the Middle East, we have this much hopeful with the Iran, Saudi Arabia dialogue, because these two regional actors that are very important in the situation in Yemen, and if they're making peace with one another, so hopefully that peace also will come to basically to the country, to the Yemenis, and also to the refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in Yemen. That was all, Ira. Sorry, probably it's a bit long, and it's questions and answer session. Anyone who has questions, very much welcome. Over to you, Ira.
Thank you very much, Kang Isa, for a comprehensive presentation. So from if I may give a brief notes on what already explained by Kang Isa. So Kang Isa starting by explaining the real condition in Yemen. So if internationally we recognize only Yemen, but in practice or de facto, there are two different government in one country, and Kang Isa also explained about the condition in relation with the neighboring countries. So it raised some of interesting question from myself actually. It's about the durable solution and the relation with country from Africa, because most of the refugee comes from Africa. And also Kang Isa mentioned about the durable solution and how some of, because you know that there's a resettlement, rehabilitation, and local integration, while it's very clear that in Yemen there's no local integration, but Kang Isa also mentioned about the work opportunity for refugee in informal sector. So it's quite interesting, and probably students or colleagues can raise question further about this issue. And also about the challenges, Kang Isa mentioned about the unpredictable situation in home country of origin of the refugee. So it's quite relates with the repatriation that Kang Isa mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, how Ethiopia, I think they voluntarily repatriate to their own country. So it's quite interesting because it's very rare to see or to acknowledge whether they want to go back to their home country voluntarily. So it's I think there's something we can discuss more about this durable solution. Before we continue to the question and answer from the students, I would like to greet some of my colleagues here that already joined in a Zoom meeting. If I'm see it correctly, I think I see there's some of colleagues from Universitas Negeri 11 Maret from Solo, I think Ibu Erna and Pak Ayub. Thank you for joining us. Also, my colleague from Unsia, Ibu Rosmawati, welcome Ibu, it's really nice to see you here. So now we will start the question and answer. I think the first one is already stated in the chat box, but it's a bit tricky, Kang Isa, because actually this is a question for the next week session for a master program. Because they have assignment for presentation and next week will be the issue about durable solution. I think the question from Widodo is the one that he's going to present. But Widodo asking about, or Widodo would like to give the question directly, or we can just sum up from the questions. I think Widodo questioning about the what durable solution from UNHCR about the condition in Yemen. Whether the asylum seeker can be placed in another country in the process of determining their status, or there are there other means to ensure their safety. I think the issue of RSD or refugee status determination is challenging in every country. So perhaps Kang Isa can give response to these questions.
Thank you, Naira. Thank you, Widodo, for the question. So when it comes to durable solutions, of course, we're trying to identify the best durable solution, and we have 3 traditional durable solutions, and I think everyone knows about this. The local integration, which is not possible in Yemen, although the refugees are very much welcome to stay here as refugees. Going back home, we are doing this, and we continue doing this because there are many people who are actually interested to go home, whether to Ethiopia, Somalia, or other countries as well. And IOM and UNHCR, we have 2 different programs. UNHCR is facilitating the Somalis, and IOM is facilitating the Ethiopians. And the third country solutions, when it comes to resettlement, complementary pathways, I think I briefly mentioned in my presentation that it's not always up to UNHCR how many people that we can resettle them per year, because as I mentioned last year, countries only gave UNHCR Yemen 30 individual spots for them to be resettled, and this year it increases to 100. But again, even with the current situation in Yemen, still Yemen is not being prioritized for the refugees in Yemen, not being prioritized for resettlement. So I know that different UNHCR officers, including here in Yemen, we are kind of like moving from traditional durable solutions, that are 3 of them that I mentioned, to a more like a comprehensive solutions. So meaning that we know that it's not going to be secure in one day. The country where they are originally from is not going to increase the number when it comes to resettlement. So when it comes to they live in Yemen, so we just have to make sure that the access to their basic rights, education, healthcare, livelihood to be fulfilled, basically. So they're just not waiting in Yemen doing nothing, but they can go to school, they can work, and then one day, if their country is safe enough for them to go home, or if there is an opportunity for them to go to another country, they can use that skills, their education, expertise, to restart their lives in their new country or in their new country. And nowadays, there is, when it comes to durable solutions, there is a solution that we call complementary pathways. So there are so many different programs under this big umbrella of complementary pathway. It can be scholarship. There are many different universities in Western countries that provide scholarship for refugees around the world. So they can avail that if they want. Now also we have this when it comes to livelihood. Some countries, they're having shortage when it comes to labor or manpower in their country, and they need migrants or refugees to come in and help them to work in certain sectors in their country. This is also another possibility. And then, of course, we also have private sponsorships. Different countries, they have immigration procedures, schemes. For instance, like in Canada, they have private sponsorship schemes where 5 Canadian nationals can sponsor 1 refugee. So it's completely immigration procedure, but usually UNHCR provides administrative support because we have to confirm that yes, Isa is a refugee in Yemen. He has a refugee status, so Isa should be eligible for this private sponsorship scheme to Canada. So there's also another opportunity, and we're trying to identify more opportunities when it comes to durable solutions. But again, as you mentioned, it's not always easy, especially in countries like Yemen. Thank you. Over.
Okay, thank you, Kang Isa. So the next question from Anand, please.
Okay. Good morning, Kang Isa, Bu Ira, Bu Orin, and hello, and participants in this general lecture, public lecture. I would like to thank you for the opportunity, Bu Ira. I'm going to ask, there is so many terms that that we know about the refugees. We have such refugees, and then we have internally displaced persons, asylum seekers, and then we have also migrants. Kang Isal, how to gimana ya? Gimana kita membedakan dari terminologi tersebut. Kemudian saya juga ingin bertanya terkait bagaimana solusi yang bisa kita lakukan, durable solutions yang bisa kita terapkan di kasus-kasus misalnya seperti pengungsi Rohingya yang kemudian masuk secara ilegal ke negara-negara di sekitar Myanmar, khususnya negara-negara Asia Tenggara. Dan mungkin itu saja yang dapat saya tanyakan. Mungkin apabila punya tambahan akan mungkin segitu dulu.
Okay, thank you, Anand.
Thanks, Anand. I don't know, Tera. Okay, I'll just respond this quickly. So, of course, when it comes to terminologies, IDPs versus refugees versus asylum seekers, I think it's very much clear. I mean, like, of course, for the IDPs, they may have the same reason why they move from one place to another place, but they're still in the same country. So they can still find that safety in other country. For instance, if they're not safe in Bandung, and maybe they will be safe in Bogor or Jakarta. So of course, you know, the applicable legal framework here, the national legal frameworks, and of course, to the extent human rights principles also will be applicable for them, especially if they move to the other city village because of human rights issues, you know, persecution as well as generalized. When it comes to refugees, asylum seekers, of course, it's a different situation because they cross international border to another country to seek international protection, you know. So there will be some legal framework maybe that is not applicable to them because they are not the nationals of those countries. And of course, you know, but the Refugee Convention, Human Rights Convention should be applicable to them. And how to identify durable solutions probably also will be different, you know, whether you as a national or you are as a refugee or asylum seekers who are not from the country that you are seeking asylum from. And you mentioned about the Rohingyas, what would be the possible durable solution for them? But you know, like in any other refugee situations, as long as the root cause of the displacement is not addressed, they will be keep moving, and those who already left, probably they are not coming back to their country of origin. And of course, when it comes to the Rohingya, it is a persecution, yes, but of course it's statelessness issue because they are being deprived of citizenship of Myanmar. So being someone in a country that you would want to, but have no, basically have no rights, you know, as a citizen, you know, and that's very difficult, you know. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed as well, you know, before actually offering for the Rohingyas to go back to Myanmar also, you know. And the fact that Myanmar is still under the military regime probably is not really helpful as well, because it's affecting not only the Rohingyas now, but also other people, from different ethnic groups or religious groups in Myanmar as well. But again, when it comes to Rohingyas, we have ASEAN, and I know that ASEAN has been very active as well. Hopefully, even probably more, to give more like pressure probably to the Myanmar government to address this issue. But I think the solution should be coming from the region, from Myanmar, from countries in the region, and also to involve the Rohingyas as well when it comes to what they want actually when it comes to the solutions. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Kang Isa. And the next question from Arifania, please.
Okay, thank you, Bu Ira, for the opportunity. So good afternoon, Pak Isa. Thank you for the explanation. So I have a question, but I'm sorry if this is like a basic theory of the rights of the refugee, basic question, but I'm very curious about that. So at the very beginning, you stated earlier that usually host country that become host country is those country who comes from low to middle economic income, but there's also a developed country like Germany or such. And my question is, why is that happen? And is there any authorization from UNHCR, or can they has authorization to obligate a state to become a host state of refugees? Because as far as I know, I know one principle of that is also become customary international law, which is called the principle of non-refoulement. So as far as I know, the principle obligates or prohibit a state who want to avoid a refugee who comes from another country. So is there any capabilities from UNHCR to choose a state to become host state to accommodate refugees from another country, or maybe there has to be a mechanism for it? So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Arifiana, for the question. So I think when it comes to hosting countries, as I mentioned earlier, most of these hosting countries, they actually have land borders to countries that are producing refugees. So this is the reason why the number of refugees in all these hosting countries are much, much bigger compared to any other countries in the world. And it happened also, most of them are whether low income countries or middle income countries. Germany is an exception. Because I think that if you follow the news years back, when there are so many migrants, refugees, asylum seekers moving to the west, using Turkey, taking the boat to Greece, and then keep moving until Germany, because at that time, and I think it's still until now, Germany has quite, what do you call it, refugee-friendly policy. At that time, Angela Merkel was still the head of state. So I think that also kind of like attracted many people going to Germany, and the fact that Germany is a developed country, advanced economy, so maybe many refugees think that they would probably have better living conditions in Germany, even being a refugee compared to being a refugee in Indonesia, for instance. When it comes to UNHCR has the authority to sign, to influence someone being the host country, we don't have that kind of capacity, because I think countries, they have their own, they have to make their own decision, when it comes to hosting, not hosting, or taking refugees as part of their resettlement duty. But to actually tell that, hey, country A, please take 1 million refugees and take care of them, I don't think UNHCR has that authorization. And I think as many other, I think the issue, of course, when it comes to international law, when it comes to the enforcement of the international law, is it's not like, like in the national law that we have the law enforcement agency and all that. We have different platforms where we can naming and shaming. Hey, country A, you do better to protect the refugees, but at the end, it depends on the country whether they want to listen or not. Yeah. Thank you.
I think Kang Isa, most of country they like give like the quotas, like if they want to accept a refugee, they like giving quotas. So I think if the case is hosting hub, because the question is quite interesting, because can UN assign probably some country to accommodate refugee or become a host country? I think it depends on the principle of solidarity, like states willing to share the burdens, or they offering, they accept how many refugees from this country and so on. I think there's no like specific pattern on how this hosting country, because it's really depends on the situation of each country, right? Okay, and the next question, I think we have Axel from UNSUD. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, you may ask the question to Kang Isa.
All right, thank you so much for the time, Wira and Kang Isa. So I'm Axel. I'm a law student from UNSUD, 6th semester right now. So I'm doing a research in my journal. I'm taking refugees on my research. So basically, Indonesia is not the country that is ratifying the Convention on the Refugees on 51 and the Protocol on 97, if I'm mistaken. And so we can actually interpret it that Indonesia has no responsibilities to any kind of basic needs fulfillment to the refugees. And basically, Indonesia is being the transit country where all the refugees want to go to Australia, most of them. But Australia is closing their own border on 2018. So there are around 13,000 refugees in Indonesia, and Indonesia has no responsibilities to do that. So my question is, what can actually Indonesia do to fulfill the at least the certainty of law itself? Or maybe because if Indonesia is not responsible, so IOM or UNHCR itself have no that kind of power to do the thing more to the refugees compared to the country that ratified the convention. So yeah, maybe that's my question.
Thank you so much, Axel, for the question. So when I was in Indonesia, this question was asked a lot, actually. Okay, let me just explain you, and hopefully in a way that is understandable, and also based on experience that I have. Even I work in countries that are similar to Indonesia, not a state party to the convention. Okay, first of all, non-reform law, as mentioned by Arif Fanian, it is a customary international law. So whether you are a state party or not, then it is very much applicable and it has to be enforced, especially when it comes to access to asylum and so on and so forth. And I understand that Indonesia is very much respectful when it comes to this principle. So I'm very grateful as someone who has been working for the refugees, including Indonesia. When it comes to access to basic rights, as you mentioned, we're not a state party. Indonesia is not a state party, so we don't have the obligation. I would argue that is not entirely correct, because Indonesia at the same time has ratified many different human rights conventions. And as you know, ICCPR, ICACR is not a right of citizen, it's a right of human being. And of course, refugees being a human being, this is also applicable to them. Yeah. And when it comes to Convention on Rights of the Child, you will see there are provisions about refugee children in that CRC. And I don't think that Indonesia made any reservation on under that provision, meaning that again, when it comes to refugee children, CRC also very much applicable to them. And fortunately, even in Indonesia, we have some best practices when it comes to protection of refugee children. As you know, that they have now access to education, to public school, after the Surat Edaran, the directive from the Minister of Education was issued back in 2018, and we hope that, this best practices also will continue to tertiary education or to other sectors or aspects of human rights or human lives in general. So when I was in Pakistan, Pakistan has been hosting 1.4 million of Afghan refugees. Pakistan is not a state party to the 1951 convention. And Pakistan is still actually providing support that is beyond what many countries in Southeast Asia is doing. For instance, refugees in Pakistan, they can study until PhD level if they want, and Pakistan government provides even scholarship for the Afghan refugees. Very competitive scholarship, but those who actually want to go to tertiary education, they can avail this opportunity. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, some of these refugees who graduated from top medical schools in Pakistan, at the end, they contribute to Pakistan medical sector by, being one of the frontliners dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Refugees in Pakistan, again, can work. It's not illegal for them to work. And many Pakistanis, they realize the importance of refugees contributing economically to their village, to their town. If you go to different shops, markets in Pakistan, you will see, especially during big holidays, like Eid holidays, usually the Afghan shops are open while the local shops are not open. So I was benefited from the good practice as well, because during Eid holidays in Pakistan, I could still buy a very delicious Afghan bread, because fully the human rights conventions that we have ratified, Indonesia has ratified, and trying to also carefully assess, which provisions that can be applicable to everyone, basically, including those who are not nationals of Indonesia, including especially refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants even, So I would argue that it's not entirely correct that Indonesia has no obligation when it comes to protecting or providing access to basic rights for the refugees under the human rights perspective that I mentioned. But I know that this is something that still very much different perspective when it comes to us, the UN and the government. And I think the dialogues needs to continue, So then I want best practices happen in Pakistan that also happen in Indonesia, for instance. And Indonesia being much probably better economically than Pakistan, I want my country to actually do more when it comes to refugee protection. Thank you. Over.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Axel. Hopefully the answer quite satisfying. So the next question, I will give the privilege to my colleague to perhaps want to start a discussion with Kang Isa, Ibu Kristi, Ibu Orin, or my other colleague from other university. Feel free to start the discussion or asking questions, perhaps. There's no. Oh, okay. Then if that's the case, can I ask questions? Kang Isa. You mentioned earlier about how the condition in Pakistan, and you make an example how like the store open while the locals is closed. It sounds like smooth integration, or I don't call it integration, because like there's no problem with the foreigner among the locals. While in Indonesia, we can see that there's like the condition that probably in certain area only, but not generally accepted. So based on your experience, is it easy to like create the atmosphere of accepting foreigner among the locals, like you giving the example earlier?
Thank you, Teira. I think this is a very important question. Yes, maybe in Pakistan, of course, it's different situation than in Indonesia. The Afghan refugees, they are representing different ethnic groups as well in Afghanistan. The Pashtuns, the Hazaras, and usually they tend to live in areas in Pakistan where the majority of in that area is the Pashtun for the Pashtun refugees, the Hazara for the Hazara refugees. So they speak the same language, the same culture, value, and all of them also belong to the same religious backgrounds. So probably it's easier and smoother for them to locally integrate. And even sometimes you cannot just differentiate which one is local, which one is refugee, because they look the same, they dress the same, and they speak the same language as well. But I think what it is very important to highlight here as well, because the fact that refugees have access to education, so at the end, they have access to learning the local language. And in Pakistan, there are many different languages, but Urdu is the national language of the country, like Bahasa Indonesia in Indonesia. And the refugees are really willing to learn the local language. So when you speak the local language, of course, it's easier for them to locally integrate, not only in the areas that they are living, because when they are traveling in different parts of Pakistan that speak different languages, they can still use the Urdu language to communicate with the locals. It's not always easy, despite all that. It's not always easy also when it comes to local integration, because of course, at the end, refugees are refugees. Refugees are not Pakistanis, so there are differences when it comes to many different things as well. And sometimes it creates tension, and problems and all that, For instance, when it comes to anyone in conflict with domestic law, it is like local versus refugee. It's a simple lease agreement or whatever, like a simple thing, and sometimes the law enforcement agency, they would, a bit favor of the local, that happened, But how UNHCR and other partners are, working on this, because we keep continuously working on promotion of peaceful coexistence. We do many information dissemination. We create activities, initiatives, projects that actually combine both the locals and the refugee communities, So they work together, they study together. We help the government to build, let's say, schools. We build hospitals, but these institutions will have to benefit both locals and also the refugees. So I think Indonesia can do the same, UNHCR in Indonesia, any different humanitarian actors in Indonesia, when they do something, create some projects, initiatives, I think they need to meet these two community members, the refugees and the locals. So they meet, they talk, they interact, so probably that eliminate some prejudices that they have amongst each other, because the prejudices, not only the locals against the refugees, sometimes the refugees also against the locals as well. But of course, the fact that the culture is very much different, of course, with Indonesia, but there are also many similarities as well, But I think learning the local language, at least in Indonesia, could be very much vital, about this local integration. I know when I was in Indonesia, usually the younger generations of refugees, they are willing to learn Bahasa Indonesia. So yeah, probably, well, it's not that the situation is really bad, but I think maybe in the near future, it's going to be better when it comes to peaceful coexistence between two communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kang Isa. So I think it's not easy and complicated, because in Indonesia itself, rather than, they're providing if we are talking about the resettlement, it's not a short-term solution. It takes a lot of time. Meanwhile, we have to do something, because we cannot live with the refugee just staying in a safe house or something, doing nothing and waiting for years. Okay, is there any other question from students, from my dear student in magister program? Specifically, okay, there's Aditya. I just want to ask you earlier, but okay, Aditya.
Thank you, Mrs. Ira, and thank you for explanation, Mr. Isa. I want to ask about the regarding research and rescue and handling of refugee in Yemen. Usually there is a humanitarian objects, but only in the short term. As explained in the slide earlier, UNHCR has planned for the long term regarding refugees. However, aside from refugees, are there other effort being made, such as maybe pushing a political solution, maybe, or encourage the country to provide security guarantees, maybe? Have UNHCR done will do not only for subject of refugees, but maybe other side, maybe for to abuse the country have a problem with that, maybe in this case is Yemen, maybe. And then what is the most effective approach in handling refugee in the long term, especially on the case in Yemen? That's I want to know about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Aditya. So the approach in Yemen, well, basically it's not really similar to what is happening in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia in general, when it comes to mixed movements, boat disembarkations and all that, In Indonesia, as you all know, when the boats disembark, the Rohingyas will be put in like one location, and then all different humanitarian actors providing support, assistance, and so on and so forth. In Yemen, we don't have that kind of like a system. So when they reach the Yemeni coast, so usually the refugees, and usually who help them if they need help, we have coordination with the, is it water police? I don't know how to say it in English. It's kind of like an authority who is doing the water monitoring and all that. So they usually help. But sometimes, the boats just come naturally and safely disembark. And usually the refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, they keep moving, as I mentioned, they are trying to go to the north and trying to cross the border to Saudi Arabia. But those who actually want to stay seeking asylum, the Yemeni authorities, we don't localize them in one place. We urbanize them, meaning that they will go to bigger cities. Like in the south, of course, we have Mocha, we have Aden, because that's where all the humanitarian organizations are located, and the hospitals, the schools are located, So they just live among the locals, and they can, access all these facilities, whether it's education, healthcare, and to some extent also cash assistance that UNHCR also has that kind of like program. I would say this is probably the best approach that we have in Yemen, and it's not uniquely in Yemen. In Pakistan as well, we don't localize the refugee. There is no refugee camp in Pakistan, So the refugees just go directly and then urbanize themselves, living among the society, and then their community members will help them. If they want to go to the hospital, they just go. Because the issue with localization, when you put refugees in refugee camp far away from everyone, that there will be like a sense of exclusion, and sometimes that is actually not good when it comes to peaceful coexistence. They just creates like more tension, and they're more suspicious about the locals, and so the locals also will be more suspicious about the refugees because they're all in the same location as well. And refugee camps usually, as you all know, there's no infrastructure that are so good when it comes to education, healthcare, and all that. So that's also will be raising some protection issues, human rights issues, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Kang Isa.
Thank you, Mr. Isa.
So localized refugee is not a good solution. While in Indonesia, we still see that some of the refugees are being localized in certain area because it's easy to I don't know how to say it, to when it's localized, it's easy to check whether they have certain activity or so. Okay, does Ibu Corinne, it will be closing questions. Ibu Orin.
Thank you, Ibu Ira and Isa. I'd like to know about like the real situations, not only in Yemen, but probably Yemen can be one of the good examples, because you've been traveling around the world with the conflict situation, taking care about this refugee. Isa, I would like to know what the situation about, because all of the like education, healthcare facilities that will be given to those who have status of refugees. But what if they are still in the status of the asylum seeker? Because usually they are come with undocumented issues, like this is one of the issue in Indonesia. Of course, you already you are very know about this, but maybe you can share with us also. We have some issues because like children, refugee children. No, sorry, in Indonesia, maybe they are not refugee yet, but they are the asylum seeker. The basic rights of the education or healthcare, of course, is a basic rights, but they cannot enjoy that because they don't have any document. And our national legislations in Indonesia also. Well, luckily, I think we have good policy like the surat edaran from Menteri Pendidikan. But what about the situations in Yemen? Because you mentioned that Yemen has no national legislations to give some kind of guarantee of the protections of these issues. Can you share with that? Can you share about that, Lisa?
Thank you, Theorin. I think also another important question. So at least from UNHCR perspective and all the humanitarian agencies, whether under UN or INGOs, I think now we are more inclusive, meaning that, you know, whether you are refugees, whether you are asylum seekers, you will have exactly the same access when it comes to assistance programs, cash assistance, any other interventions that you may need, regardless your status. Because being asylum seeker, basically, you also will get the documentation from UNHCR, and that is very much sufficient to access our assistance program. But of course, when it comes to public institutions or any institutions under the government, sometimes that they have this distinctive approach. Asylum seeker, refugee, you know, refugee gets more, asylum seeker don't get, or maybe they have no access at all. You know, and I think UNHCR is trying to advocate that basically refugees, asylum seekers, at the end, they are people in need of international protection until that they are being decided not as a refugee. So I think they should be able to access the assistance or the basic rights that they need as a human being. In Yemen, for instance, you know, all the public institutions that UNHCR is closely working with, including hospitals, and education, basically both refugees and asylum seekers, they can go and access it. Even we don't really say that they are asylum seekers, they are refugees, they are all refugees, you know, because in fact they do, you know. So regardless on paper they are asylum seekers, still they can still access this assistance program. The same thing also in Pakistan as well. The only difference is that when it comes to certain durable solutions, for instance, resettlement or complementary pathways, usually these countries, you know, Canada, US, or whatever, they still require these people to be refugees, that having a refugee status, that they have gone through the refugee status determination process. So yeah, for that, we need to RSD them, and then, you know, and then if they are refugees, then they may be considered for resettlement or other complementary pathways schemes, you know. But when it comes to basic needs, when they are staying in Pakistan, in Yemen, and even in Indonesia, so they should be able to access that without any problems. Thank you.
Okay, Ibu Orin, is there any further questions?
Yeah. So basically, they are just like referring to the international conventions that they are parties to it. So it doesn't matter that they don't have the national legislations. Is that correct, Isa? Thank you.
Yes, like in Yemen context, at least, you know, I think the South government, the internationally recognized government in Yemen, I think they are very much supportive to what UNHCR and other organizations are doing for the refugees. They are not really meddling so much. They trust our system, how you know, we do the interview, how we refer the refugees to public institutions for assistance and all that, you know, because they do that as well for the Somalis, you know. They register the Somalis, and there's no individual RAC for the Somalis. They basically just granted them in group recognition status, which is prima facie. And since there's no national legislation, so there is no restriction on paper that UNHCR or government can help only refugees, not asylum seekers. Yeah, they don't differentiate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kang Isa, Ibu Orin. There's no further questions. Okay, so it will be the last questions, and I don't want to conclude all the discussion, but because Kang Isa already giving answer and respond to the question from all of you, and allow me to say thank you for all your active participation, and also for Kang Isa for sparing your time with us. Hopefully in the future we can meet directly at our campus, not only Zoom. Thank you so much, and allow me to give on behalf of the head of department, Pak Atip, because he cannot join us today, but he wants you to have this certificate. Thank you so much again for your sharing knowledge and experience, and hopefully in the future you still want to give some insight to our students and also our colleagues. And let me turn back to bahasa, dan mudah-mudahan para mahasiswa bisa mengambil manfaat dari sesi yang sudah kita adakan, dan mudah-mudahan nanti mungkin ada yang menyusul hendak menjadi humanitarian worker seperti Kang Isa, nanti bisa kontak-kontak. Terima kasih banyak Kang Isa dari kami semua di Departemen Hukum Internasional. Sukses selalu, have a good day, karena di sana baru mulai pagi hari, sementara di sini sudah menjelang sudah lewat dari lohor. Terima kasih. Mau Kang Isa ada closing statement?
Terima kasih Teh Ira, Teh Orin, Teh Kristi, dan teman-teman semuanya sudah memberikan kesempatan kepada saya untuk bisa berbagi. Dan tadi yang Teh Ira sampaikan sebenarnya juga saya ingin sampaikan, mudah-mudahan sesi sharing saya ini bisa menginspirasi teman-teman, gak cuma untuk menulis skripsi atau disertasi, tapi juga untuk bergabung dengan organisasi kemanusiaan seperti UNHCR atau UN agencies yang lainnya. Karena terus terang waktu saya zaman kuliah pun saya jarang terekspos kepada jenis pekerjaan seperti ini. Selalu biasanya akan teteh yang sukses di law firm atau yang kerja di kementerian ini, kementerian itu, kayak gitu. Padahal bidang kemanusiaan juga sangat relevan untuk teman-teman yang tertarik di isu-isu hukum internasional, HAM, ataupun hukum humaniter. Dan bahkan lebih real karena benar-benar aplikasinya secara langsung, dan advokasinya juga langsung menggunakan konvensi Jenewa, ICCPR, dan segala macam seperti itu. Jadi mudah-mudahan bisa menjadi pertimbangan ketika sudah lulus dari kampus S1, S2, dan seterusnya, bisa mempertimbangkan apply pekerjaan di tempat-tempat seperti ini. Terima kasih.
Mimpi saya sebenarnya Kang Isa di UNHCR, cuman end up-nya di Fakultas Hukum sebenarnya. Baik, terima kasih Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman mahasiswa semuanya. Makanya dengan ini kuliah hari ini kita tutup dengan ucapan alhamdulillah. Terima kasih sekali lagi untuk semuanya, dan Kang Isa selamat siang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Kang Isa.